Board of School estimate for Thursday, March 11th, 2021. Now I'll read the announcement of notice. This meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded for storage and viewing on our district website. The public can participate during the hearing of individuals and delegates by submitting a written statement using the BOE questions form on the website, by using the chat feature of the WebEx, or by signing up for a live audio public speaks available on the website as well. Adequate notice of this meeting of the South Orange Maplewood Board of Estimate has been sent to both townships, clerks, the Star Ledger, the News Record, Tap Into, SomaNet, and thevillagescreen.com. We will now have the roll call. Deputy Mayor Daffis.
Here.
Committeeman Limbrick. Committeewoman Adams. President Collum.
Here.
Trustee Collier. Trustee Hilton.
Here.
Trustee Clark.
Here.
President Joshua.
Here.
Board Member Wright.
Present.
And Board Member Siders.
Here.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now we'll have a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So before we get started into our discussion, which is an update on construction and debt service, which is essentially our most of our agenda for tonight, I wanted to take a second to read into a record a formal statement by myself as well as President Collum. 1 year ago tomorrow, from the mayor's office in Town Hall, I declared a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 virus that was spreading rapidly through our community and our country. The next day, President Collum enacted the same decision for South Orange. It is 1 year later, and our municipalities are experiencing a new state of emergency, and it involves our children and their education. It is evident to my colleagues and I that it's time for our teachers, who we love and respect and are part of the SOMEA organization, to come together and reimagine the type of leadership that they want to represent them in our community. President Collum and I, as well as Mayor Klein of Livingston, worked collaboratively, initially to push for resources at the county level regarding vaccination opportunities for our teachers. And after garnering support from the county, we then took our advocacy to Governor Murphy and his staff, which resulted in the opportunity for any teacher to be vaccinated. This was a critical milestone in what has been a long journey toward our children returning to the classroom.
In addition, our collective efforts also led to providing testing opportunities for our teachers and administrators at a medical testing facility in South Orange, or the ability to take a COVID-19 test on school grounds once our teachers return to school. We believe that the phased-in hybrid approach, which returns the children of the South Orange Maplewood community to classrooms, provides more than enough adequate space in our facilities to teach safely, while providing time to address the remaining areas in question in our facilities to be addressed in preparation for a return to full in-class instruction.
So as a parent of a student in the district, and as taxpayers in the district, we are looking for the leadership of SOMEA to end this now, or for all of our teachers to reimagine their leadership and collaborate with our community so that we can move forward from this pandemic, and most importantly, achieve our collective goal which is providing our children with a quality education with in-class instruction, which they deserve. Thank you. We'll now move on to our discussion item, which is update on construction and debt service. I will now yield the floor to Mr. Roth. Mr. Roth?
Thank you. Mr. Bonds, could you pass control over to me so I could share my screen, please?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. So just give me 1 second. Okay. So everyone should see the title splash screen of the PowerPoint right now. Okay, see a few head shaking. Yes, that's great. Before I start going through it, it's a brief presentation. Just want to take the moment to say thank you to everybody here, and as well as the administrators that work in both South Orange and Maplewood. During the last 4 years, every time I reached out for help, support, sometimes as simple as just needing some information, everyone has always been very responsive and supportive. So I think it's important everyone knows just how hard the administrators in the townships are working, as well as the school district, and I really appreciated that support during my tenure here. So with that said, tonight I'm just covering a brief overview of the status of the long-range facility plan. So summary of progress, and as a reminder, back in July 2019, the Board of School Estimate officially approved funding for the long-range plan. Funding was in the amount of about $158 million. September of 2019, the district held the first bond sale. As of June 2020, the Board of Education approved all the elementary school project designs to move forward, which then went over to the state and local municipalities for various levels of approval. October 2020, which is just about 5-6 months ago, we held our second bond sale. And I'm very happy to say that as of March this year, the state provided approvals for the school district to advertise for bid renovations and construction for Clinton, Jefferson, Seth Boyden, and Tuscan. The remaining elementary schools, I am expecting to have those approvals hopefully in the next few weeks. And today, if anyone was looking in the Star Ledger, the first advertisement to solicit proposals for construction and renovation for Clinton and Jefferson School appeared. So it shouldn't be long before contracts are awarded and work begins. A little more detail on the status of the bond sale. The Board of School Estimate authorized the district to raise $157,386,058 to fund the long-range facility plan. The finance plan was to sell the bonds over a 3-year period of time, and that was to essentially ease in tax impact slowly over time. The first bond sale was in the amount of $64.4 million. And at the time, we were estimating that interest rates would come in about 3.85%. After competitively receiving proposals for the bond sale, we locked in a rate at 2.63%, which was really good at the time. And more recently, back in this past fall, the second bond sale in the amount of $60 million took place. At the time, we updated our estimates, and we were anticipating interest rates to come in at about 2.5%. Again, we were able to beat that estimate, and the actual rate that was locked in for the second bond sale was 2.33%. So either this summer or fall, and the timing is decided based upon a lot of advice from our financial advisors. They help us time the bond market. Approximately the last $33 million is due for bond sale. Going back to 2019, when the finance plan was first presented to the Board of School Estimate, We were estimating that peak debt service for the school district would be about 11.5 million. Because of the lower interest rates on the bond sale, those projections as of fall of 2020 is estimated to be about 10.8 million. So the aggressive interest rates essentially is taking off a little more than $500,000 from that projected peak debt service. So what do we do with all this bond money? Well, the bond proceeds are deposited into a managed account. It's an arbitrage managed account. All interest earned on bond proceeds is returned to the public because it helps fund debt service. So the district does not keep the interest earned. It is returned to the taxpayer in the form of tax relief against the debt service payment. And this information is actually audited annually. So it is looked after carefully. I want to go through what the district's debt service looks like at this point. And I have a few slides that'll break this chart out. So prior to the long-range plan being approved, there were a number of outstanding bond issues and refinancing, of course, all approved by either the Board of School Estimate and the school board. And then most recently, the last two bond sales were locked in at the end of August and the end of November in 2019 and 20 respectively. So two of the bond sales, as I said, are complete with one remaining. Come on. Oh, there we go. These two columns show the amount of principal and interest that the district is required to pay back in the form of debt service for the next school year. And finally, the total of the principal and interest payments across these bond issues is $9.3 million. So that's the district's total debt service. However, the district is not paying back all $9.3 million on local tax dollars. The local tax levy to support the debt is about $7 million. The remaining dollars is made up of state aid and interest earned on bond proceeds. So moving into next school year, $460,000 of interest was earned on the bond, and that is going towards the debt service payment during next school year. And debt service aid last year, well, this current school year was about $1 million, and we were just notified by the state that our debt service aid is being increased to $1.8 million. So the $9.3 million debt from the school district is essentially $7 million in local tax dollars and the remaining in alternative revenue. So that's the last slide. And then I just want to add a few sentences on here that moving forward, the district does have other supports in a transition plan in place to ensure that construction takes place as smooth and as easy as possible. Coming up during the school district's budget meeting, there is a recommendation to hire a facility director position, which would mainly focus on helping with the management of construction. And that's in addition to both having an architect and construction management services. So with that, I hope that builds enough confidence that there are resources in place to look after this and that the finances are being managed appropriately. And at this point, I could say that it's just down to implementation. All the tools and everything are there to turn this district into a new beautiful place during the next 4 or 5 years. And of course, that wouldn't have happened without the tremendous support from everyone in our local townships and of course our community at large. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. I have a question myself, but I'll open the floor for questions from my colleagues. Would anyone like to address Mr. Roth?
Mr. Mayor, I have 2 questions.
Perfect.
Thank you. And I don't know whether these questions are best answered by Mr. Roth or Dr. Taylor, but I have 2 questions. The first of which is, can you talk about, as to when the work is going to begin on each school, at least for the ones that are approved thus far, and and the timeline for completion of those schools. And then the second question is, how, if at all, does this impact the equity plan in terms of taking away the neighborhood districting and implementing sort of more even demographics across our at least our elementary schools. What is the timing for that program?
I could answer the construction timeline, and I'll pass the redistricting off to Dr. Taylor. So I'm not going to have an exact date because a lot of things can happen on construction projects of this size. But the bid opening is scheduled for the end of April, and we're hoping that either during our tentative May 3rd tax levy meeting or the May 10th Board of Education meeting that the contracts would be awarded. And at that point, you're looking at 60 to 90 days for mobilization and things to start. So I would anticipate construction starting midsummer. Clinton School will take the longest out of the elementary schools. That is because there are 2 different additions that have to go on the building. Hence, Clinton School is one of the first ones going through. The front of the building, right behind the front of the building, is the first set of additions, which will provide classroom space equal to the space that the current portable classrooms provide. And when that is complete, then the portables will be removed and the second part of the addition will go on in the back of the school. At a minimum, that is a 2-year project, and that's assuming no issues come up as far as environmental issues or anything else when people open up old buildings. The rest of these schools would be, anywhere from about 18 months from the time they start. And again, that's assuming things run smooth. There will be issues. The project is huge. It's not going to be perfect because 100-year-old buildings, things are just going to be found when they open up the walls. But that's the tentative schedule at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. I know Mr. Lindbergh had a second question related to equity plan. Dr. Taylor, would you like to address that question, please?
Most definitely. Thank you. And again, good evening to everyone who I haven't had a chance to say hello to. Paul's answer, Mr. Roth's response, is a perfect segue to the second part of the question, right? All of the complexities that come with major construction projects are a reason why the Board of Education last year supported the idea of untethering our intentional integration from the construction plan. Previous thoughts around this were that we would integrate as the construction was completed, that the completion of construction would trigger integration plans. But as Mr. Roth has said, construction can be very unexpected, and it could have just complications that you can't anticipate. So the construction right now is not impacting or delaying our intentional integration plans as they were shared in June. We still expect by this June to be able to notify all incoming kindergarten families of their new school assignment based on our intentional integration algorithm. And we'll be sharing more about that coming up very shortly. And for those who may not be as familiar with it, the intentional integration algorithm is based on a design that is now in Berkeley, California, but was started in other places. And our intentional integration algorithm consultant is actually a leading national expert who has done this work across the country. And so we're phasing it in with our kindergartners for year 1, and we will go from there for following years, including our 6th graders in year 2 with those next incoming kindergartners. And we'll be moving through the school district with that algorithm, hopefully, as the construction is moving to fruition as well. and there are some complications, right? Like we know that eventually our board has already voted for all of our elementary schools to be K-5 schools. And we know that we have 2 schools that are not K-5 schools right now, right? With our Marshall Jefferson pairing. So eventually, as we move through the years, when we have enough rooms in those 2 buildings to hold complete K-5, continuum of students, they will be shifted to that. But again, that's probably multiple years away from us right now.
So,
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, a quick follow-up for clarification.
Mr. Limbrick, please.
Thank you. So, Dr. Taylor, just to clarify, starting next September, when obviously we're hoping that all of our students are going to be back in person full time, students who are currently in the district, K through 11, you're expecting that those students will, at least for next year, be attending the school that they would have otherwise been districted for. Is that correct? So a current 4th grader, for example, is going to be in 5th grade at the same school next year?
Yes, that is correct. We are not, the intentional integration algorithm is not being applied to any other students in our district except for kindergartners. Now, one important part of the algorithm that we know was a major concern of some families is the sibling preference, right? And sibling preference is triggered when a student is going to have a sibling in one of the elementary schools that has a kindergarten option. And so some of those items are part of our algorithm work to take that very valid concern off the table for families. So yes, only kindergarten students will be in this pilot, and the following year it'll grow to our next incoming group of kindergartners, and then to the 6th graders who will be entering middle school at that time.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. And Mr. Mayor, thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Thank you, Mr. Limbrick, and safe travels. I will now open up the floor for any other of my colleagues to address or provide any questions to Mr. Roth or Dr. Taylor.
Mayor Frank, if it's okay, can I take it away just a little bit?
President Collum, I yield the floor to you.
Thank you so much. So first, on behalf of the South Orange Board of Trustees, we want to take a moment to acknowledge Mr. Roth. This is the first time that we are coming together as a publicly noticed meeting to acknowledge your sheer dedication, your professionalism, guiding us through a significant transit-oriented development. That's the train right next to me. You shepherding us through a very significant moment for South Orange and Maplewood with the bond passage and the commitment of South Orange Maplewood and the South Orange Maplewood Board of Education to undertake something that historically has never even been considered. I think on the inside, we all acknowledge the critical role that you played in meeting with us individually in making the sales pitch for something that will be a significant investment, especially for taxpayers. And so I applaud you on behalf of the South Orange community. I know that Maplewood feels the same way for your leadership and acknowledging that you will be very much missed, and that we wish you all the best, and that you are not a stranger, and that you stop by and visit us and provide your guidance and your smile as we move forward. We very much appreciate everything you've done for us, Mr. Roth.
Well, now I'm speechless, but so I'll just leave it at thank you at the moment, because I'm not sure what else to say, but thank you.
At least on our side of the border, we're very good at public embarrassment, so get used to it. We'll do a little bit more on that front. The next part is certainly a thank you to Mayor Frank, certainly a partner in crime, as I would say, between the South Orange and Maplewood governing bodies. I think one of the things that the public perhaps may not fully understand is that through some of these challenging times of reopening, not reopening, is that we've managed to have a wonderful and productive relationship with Superintendent Taylor, Mr. Roth, Board President Joshua, Board Member Siders, in having these kind of conversations about the challenges that you're experiencing right now. And I think that Mayor Frank articulated it very well, is that we are here in a support role, that we believe that the direction you've moved in has been very appropriate. We understand the challenges associated with it. And as this moves forward, to acknowledge and recognize that both South Orange and Maplewood want an amicable solution, and that we have your back, and we have the backs of teachers. We have the backs of the community, right? And whatever gets us there, we appreciate you involving us, keeping us posted, and letting us know when there's items that the municipalities can engage in that will support a safe environment for the learners and for the teachers to get us to where we know we can be as an amazing South Orange and Maplewood school district. So for all of you and your endless commitment and your hours and probably nights of no sleep, we see you, we know what you're doing, and we're here to support you. And we know that we're getting close, and that we have full confidence that on the leadership of the school district that we will get there, and that hopefully our families will be able to rejoin what we know is so special about our communities, and that is our educational facilities and our education system under the right direction and leadership. So my last question, I'm sorry, those were two statements, right? It's almost like public speaks, but the more direct question, obviously we just went through the bond, very exciting, something that's long overdue. But in terms of making sure that we are absolutely prepared for the fall, specifically with the HVAC systems and what we know to be true about air circulation and improvements, could you perhaps elaborate on the strategy for this summer to ensure that I hope we are back to full, 100% students in the district by the end of this year, or actually the semester, but by the fall, that we are well positioned to ensure that 100% of our children are back, and in a way that we know that at least the HVAC, the air circulation, and the questions and concerns raised by SOMEA about specific rooms that were identified as deficient will be ready before anything else. I will add the editorial note that before anything else happens is that is perhaps the single most important item before the rest follows. Mr. Roth or Mr. Taylor, could perhaps one of you speak to ensuring that that's ready for a full in-person learning experience for the fall?
I will lead in to Mr. Roth giving some of those hard details. The first thing I want to say is, of course, thank you. Thank you for your ongoing support and partnership. And not being afraid to also reach out when you have concerns, when you hear things that you want to have more information on. Additionally, I have to be a little bit careful in my response to make sure, because of the situation that we're in, but I can lead into what I think everyone would want to hear, that we've shared a lot about, are the improvements that we've made to our buildings. Probably the crux of the matter of the disagreement that we have currently, if I had to frame it, it would be, who determines when schools are ready to be opened? That is the crux of the matter. That is why we have a dispute, because statutorily and through the history of schools in the state of New Jersey, that rests with the school district, right? The school district determines when buildings are ready to be used, when they're not ready to be used, when there's emergency closures, when there may be a need to bring in, outside experts because of OSHA concerns, or any kind of things that can happen. That could happen during a regular year. And so one thing that we want to make sure that we're being very clear about in our communications is that we meet the standards to open our schools. We meet the standards put forth by the governor's office and also by the Road to Reopening that have been shared. We meet the standards of the CDC. But we have taken a very conservative approach because we're partnering with medical experts. We want to be sure that we're monitoring any impact that reopening could have on our community, right? Because our medical professionals, our departments of health will see an uptick in the community and be able to warn us and contact trace that back to its source. We want to make sure that we don't do anything that puts the community at large in any type of danger. And so leading into Mr. Roth, I can just tell you that, that we have invested a substantial amount of funds towards reopening. This includes Odorox machines, which clean the air, purify the air, and also release particles into the air that clean the surface. These machines have been installed in all of our larger spaces, thinking about cafeterias and auditoriums and those type of things. and also in every bathroom in our schools, because we know that data has showed us, and research has showed us that fecal matter can spread COVID-19, right? So we want to make sure that we're taking those extra steps. Additionally, we know that the guidance tells us that a fresh air source is needed for circulation to remove the possibility of, in-school spread, right? And so the spaces that we're utilizing, we've been repairing all of the univents in those spaces. We've been installing brand new filters in those spaces. And I believe that Mr. Ross can report out that we're down to a really small number of repairs that we're waiting on, right? And additionally, understanding that as we await this work, the repairing of our buildings through this this long-range facilities plan, we're also continuing to upgrade our buildings because of the current circumstances. We have to put a new boiler in, et cetera. We're not cutting the cost of the work that needs to be done for us to be in person. Mr. Roth, do you want to give any specifics around some of the most recent updates on our facility improvement?
Sure. In fact, there's even been more work in prepping besides facilities as well. So I'll run through a short list. Personal protective equipment, masks, as well as plastic shields ordered for everyone, including our students. In places where there may be two people at a desk, plexiglass dividers in between, sneeze guards. Main offices, we have plexiglass up, so if students or parents come to the counter, there's that separation. Same type of things that you put in your municipal court areas. Hand sanitizer stations in every classroom and up and down the hallway. Signage put throughout to remind people to social distance, practice good hygiene. And then, of course, the Odorox machines. By the way, if you look back to August or September, there's a board resolution authorizing just over a $700,000 expenditure just for that equipment alone. And nowhere in the state guidance does it say you have to have an air purifier. To the fullest extent possible, we're trying to exceed some of these standards to make sure things are as safe as possible. We even moved ahead with replacing carpet that wasn't glued down on asbestos flooring and replaced it with tile. So if you walk through our elementary schools where the hallways were traditionally carpet, there are tile floors in the hallways, and a couple of library spaces we're able to get tile in at the 11th hour. We're down to just under 40 HVAC motors for repair, and that's out of a school district that has well over 400 instructional spaces. And I know principals have made, scheduling changes and all to make sure those rooms didn't need to be used that are waiting for those motors. Tons of filters on order. When walking through buildings multiple times, Dr. Taylor saw the amount of supplies that we have on hand for disinfecting. We didn't skimp on anything. Health and safety has always been our main concern. So the only thing that I, would like to add is there's no such thing as being COVID proof. We can't make it perfect. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world other than a clean lab. That we can't get to. But we pretty much did everything else we possibly can, with the exception of replacing the systems, and that expense is in the long-range facility plan.
Mr. Roth, actually, Mayor McGehee, can I just ask a follow-up to that?
President Collins.
Yes, Mr. Roth, to just be a little bit more direct, all the items you listed, you have shared with members of our governing body, and we're so pleased with the items that are recommended by the CDC. but I get held up again on the HVAC, the air circulation. When we adopted as a Board of School estimate and moved forward and advocated for the long range facilities plan, there were so many different components of that. That was about capacity, integration, things that were, I would say, great to haves for our residents and our families. But the most, when you kind of rejigger that and reprioritize, I think right now it is a matter of making sure that COVID is at the top, right? That the HVAC system, the air circulation, et cetera, and that parents have some level of certainty that whatever we thought about before with $160 million is now being concentrated on ensuring that 100% of students will be back into an environment that doesn't just meet the CDC or state guidelines, which I believe we do right now, but exceeds them as a result of these investments. Has there been a rejiggering of the overall long-range facilities plan to focus on the goal of 100% of students back in classrooms and what that will take to accomplish that?
For the long-range facility plan, when it comes to the replacement of the HVAC systems, one of the technologies that are available right now, I might be using the wrong word, but essentially it's an electronic purification system that goes within the HVAC unit. I think air ionization or something, but not one that produces ozone that we don't want. And that is that is actually included within the bid specs for the HVAC systems. It's listed as an alternate because it's an added cost, but it's in there. So things like that were added. We're not going to have the HVAC systems replaced in 2 months that we're just bidding out. That means everything coming out, the asbestos abatement has to happen first. So it's not, we snap our fingers and roll out $1.2 million of, 1.2 million square feet of HVAC systems. That's a huge undertaking. However, the new plans address this type of air quality as far as pandemics are concerned. So I hope you find that helpful. And the other piece, the state standard essentially says you need a fresh air component on working systems. That fresh air component means the dampers are open, and when the mechanicals are running, it's drawing in outside air. And as I said before, we're under 40 units that are waiting for the motor. So our existing systems are pulling in that fresh air component.
Thank you, Mr. Roth.
Can I add a little bit to that?
All yours.
I just wanted to just add a little bit to that we want to make sure that you and the public know that we've had these same conversations, right? Knowing that it's almost like, being right before a holiday when you exchange gifts and you're 3 days before, we can see this project right here and we can see the issue that the project can address, but we can't fast forward the design of the project or the funds that have been provided to fix what we know is on the community's mind, right? So I want to make sure that everyone's aware that we've given this thought. And Mr. Roth, of course, is very humble in what he's sharing. But even the building additions and then putting in HVAC improvements is the direction that these projects go, right? We wouldn't tear out HVAC in an operational building and then build the addition next to it, because those systems have to talk to one another and there could be unintended consequences with that. But even so, we've asked our architects to review that to see if it's possible, right? And if it's advisable. So just know that we're not just sitting on the work that we've done. We're also looking at other ways to, if nothing else, make people feel more comfortable and confident, right? That we have done, just a yeoman's effort to improve what we have to the maximum that we can improve it. But what else can be done to make people feel comfortable? We're still looking into that, and we've asked the folks who help us with that to give us some advice on that as well. Like it may not result in a very significant change, but we want to make sure that we can report out that we've done this investigation to turn over every rock to see what we can do to give the ultimate layer of confidence to our community and to our staff members as well.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Thank you, President Collum. I just want to follow up on that question. and also that statement. Mr. Roth, you talked about we're down to 40, and I'm not an HVAC expert, so please educate me. I like to learn and learn. You mentioned that out of 400 teaching learning environments that we're down to 40 from HVAC perspective. Is that like univents? Is that what we're talking about? So we are down to 40 univents at this point. And how does that work with the HVAC system? Just, I'm happy to take a little bit of HVAC 101. I know HVAC's a monster system per se, but how does it work with the univents that are in the classrooms or areas where students could be occupied?
All right, well, I'm far from the expert, so what I'm saying is to my understanding. But we are in fact talking about univents. A classroom will, you see them in pictures all the time. It's this metal box up against the wall, usually underneath the window sills. And what it does is the motor turns on and it blows heat or air conditioning. Ours aren't air conditioned, it's just heat at the moment, into the classroom. And the reason why it's on the wall is the back end of that system has an opening to the outside. So when the motor's turning, it draws in some air and it also recirculates some indoor air. So the state standard is to make sure that when that system's running, there is a fresh air component, hence the dampers being open and drawing in that outside air. And then the fan, of course, or the motor is what draws that air in and moves it into the classroom. So with those univents, there's around 40 units left that we're waiting for the motors to come back from the factory. They were sent out to get rebuilt and repaired. The manufacturer is Nesbit. They use a factory over in Mexico to do it. And I even shared a communication with Dr. Taylor earlier this calendar year that there's a small delay on that because the factory over in Mexico is shut down a couple of times for COVID, and not to mention just about every school district across the country is suddenly rebuilding all their Nesbit systems. So could imagine the backlog on that as well. And these motors are trickling in. We just had 3 that come in. So we're actually a little less than 40. I just don't have the exact count at this point. So I'm just rounding off to be safe. But the other thing is the standards also recognize a fresh air component as an open window. On nice weather days, you could open up windows and that counts as fresh air. And air really moves through a classroom when you have a couple of windows open. You wouldn't realize it on a nice 75-degree day, but if it's really hot or really cold out, you'll notice how quick that air circulates. And I'm happy to say, if you look back, a lot of our schools had all brand new windows put in. Maplewood Middle School, it was just 2 or 3 years ago, all the windows were replaced. And so we do have some classrooms where windows are broken, but that doesn't mean all 10 of them don't work in a classroom. We've been making sure that there's at least 2 windows that are functional in a room for that fresh air component, in addition to what the univent can do. Not all of our classrooms have it. It depends on the age and whatever, but the state just wants that fresh air component. And that's what we focus on. Can we get fresh air into the space?
Thank you, Mr. Roth. That was my question. I'd like to yield the floor now to any of my colleagues who would like to address Mr. Roth or Dr. Taylor.
Mr. Mayor, I have some questions. Can I start in?
Trustee Hilton, I yield the floor to you.
All right, thank you so much. I want to first start with saying thank you to you and thank you to President Collum. I completely agree with your statements. I'm sure most of us do. It's a travesty that our children are not back in school, and I really appreciate that you guys put the thought and the time into making that public statement, because even though it's not completely germane to the Board of School estimate work, it is, because it's all about our children. So thank you for saying that. And then I want to direct my question really to Mr. Roth. Mr. Roth, I'm sure you don't remember, but we go way back. I was HSA president at South Orange Middle School, and you were just a huge help, and have continued to be such a nice help all through these years. So we will definitely miss you. And I also share President Collins' comments about how helpful you've been in this throughout this whole process. But really, my question is to you in moving forward, and really, it's about the fiscal oversight. So I think the program designs of the buildings look completely fabulous, but you are losing you as a huge hole. And I want to make sure that this is addressed at this committee's level, that the school district really has ample plans in place to make sure that there's strong fiscal oversight of all this significant funding. So I don't know if you want to address that, or if Superintendent Taylor wants to address that, but I'm happy to just want it raised.
Well, here's a secret that most people don't hear about.
Okay.
And I'm going to mention these names in no particular order, first names only. But I would say Andrea, Ella, Dorothy, Melissa, Tawana, Beth, Myra, Angela. Those are all people who work in the business office. And they've been there before I sat in the business office chair, and they're still there. The reason why we've had clean audits and good fiscal oversight is because every one of those people are amazing at their job. So it's nice that I get the credit because I'm the front person talking, but without that office staff, I would have been a complete failure, quite frankly. It's so the district has amazing staff in the business office, and that is one of the big secrets. So I can confidently say everyone's in good hands with that fiscal oversight with that staff in place. So I hope that brings some comfort there as well. And on Monday, there is, an anticipated appointment for someone to sit in my chair during the transition. I'll leave it at that because the appointment's not official yet, but it's been leaked around. So thank you, Andrea. So, and I think you'll find that the staff behind me is also extremely qualified. College degrees, certified CPAs, it's amazing. When you see everyone's credentials, you become very humbled and you realize you're just one small piece in the whole pie. So.
Great. Well, and I love hearing a secret in a public meeting. That's just fabulous. Thank you very much.
Can I add on? Sure, just to add on, and again, we're not taking Mr. Roth's well-deserved retirement well. We're going to miss him as a person, and of course, miss his fantastic work that he's been doing with his great team. And we're fortunate that he's built capacity within his department, because Mr. Roth isn't only the school business administrator, he's also the board secretary, right? So there's an important task there as well. So the board president and the executive committee and I, along with our HR director, we have a plan of action to have a very rigorous interview process, because we don't want just anyone to sit in this chair and pick up these awesome responsibilities to help us. As I said before, these are generational projects, right? We only get one shot at doing this. So we're taking it very seriously, and we're not just going to put a warm body in this position. We're going through, and we have received a number of applications, and we're taking our time looking at them, and we're going to have, again, a very rigorous process. And we're lucky that that we have an assistant BA who's been a BA before, right? And I'm not supposed to talk about employees in public, but I feel that Mr. Roth has opened the door for that. So I would just say that that we're lucky that the board has someone to consider who has a lot of institutional knowledge for the transition.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. And,
Thanks so much.
and thank you, Trustee Hilton. I want to provide an opportunity for any of my remaining colleagues to ask questions of Mr. Roth or Dr. Taylor. Because I cannot see you in terms of participation, I'll just say your name, and if you have no question, it's okay. I just want to make sure I recognize you. I'll start from top down. Deputy Mayor Daffis, do you have any questions or a question for Dr. Taylor or Mr. Roth?
I'm seeing
Mr.
his
Mayor.
head shake no. So
Okay, hearing none, but seeing nothing, I will move forward. Trustee.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor, just to chime in for you, on the right-hand side of your screen, on the
Yes.
top, it may say layout there. If you hover your mouse over layout, it may give you a grid that can help you see everyone. Perhaps it'll be of assistance.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, can I just add one more thing? I'm sorry, you and I have both talked about this extensively. Mr. Roth and Superintendent Taylor. So back to this HVAC, I feel like it's like my baby these days. It's like, hey, HVAC. So on the municipal side, we face the exact same challenges, no different from the school district, but obviously your responsibility is significantly bigger, given the nature of families and children and the need for in-person instruction. A lot of our initiatives or investments resulted, regardless of whether we had open air and windows. We have plenty of offices in our municipal functions that have no windows at all, and yet we met CDC compliance with basic air filtration systems that were literally $1,000, less than that. And we knew through our health office, and we knew through the CDC guidelines and executive orders through the governor that these were sufficient to meet the requirements to bring our staff safely back. And again, the pretext is if something happens or there's a positive case, we take those protocols. But we've been operating those offices under that health guidance. So even irregardless of whether we can perform millions of dollars in upgrades to HVAC to everybody's wishes, are those things that you have investigated? Are they in place? Are they smaller items that perhaps the townships can partner with you on as an immediate way to address some of the concerns that were raised by our teachers, because they're relatively cheap, they're functional, and they meet all the necessary guidelines? So is that a consideration or something you have already put in place?
So I would say, when we're talking about offices, right? For example, many of our offices that don't have windows, they have a roof unit, right, that brings fresh air through a ceiling unit in the office space. And some of our smaller instructional spaces, like, for example, guidance counselor, right, or a social worker who may have a very small space where only 1 or 2 kids could fit with them. They have units that blow air from the roof unit. And so I would say that investing in more units, whether these are all brand names, right? Odorox or others that claim to bring in fresh air or provide a filtration. I would rely on our facility experts, whether they be our architects or other HVAC experts, to tell us if doing that, whatever the product may be. This is kind of what we're asking them to look into for us, to see if it's worth our investment, if it improves our spaces significantly enough, or is it just something to make us all feel better, right? And to determine what that investment would be. I couldn't say right now if we're committed to taking that leap, because we're looking at what those products are. And the point that I have to always reiterate is that we're already exceeding what we are required to have in our spaces that we're going to utilize, right? So it's not that we're trying to reach a plateau to utilize spaces. Whatever we do is over and above for those spaces. Mr. Roth, anything there?
Also, ASHRAE, I think I'm pronouncing it right, ASHRAE standards. Well, I think that's how it is. Many of our offices, it's one person in there, and under the standards, it says for a single-use office, just having the door open provides enough air exchange. And if you're in there by yourself, you don't infect yourself, so to speak. In some areas, we have put in filtration systems, be it if they're tied to a 504 or if there wasn't sufficient air coming in with those roof units. And so there are a couple of offices that we already employed that air filtration technology. And on a simple note, in just some areas where we had shared offices during the shutdown, it was pretty much A/B days, right? You have one person there for the day, you deep clean it, then the next person's in there for the next day. So there's so many different strategies that have been employed, along with, as I mentioned, all the PPE, signage, and everything else.
And just one last point. This is a very important topic, and thank you again, Madam President, for bringing it up. As we move towards the fall, and I've said this numerous times, it's our goal to open fully as we safely, as fully and as safely as we can. Some of those linchpins around doing that, and we've shared this, in other places as well, is working through what lunch looks like, right? Like, those are some of the questions that, in the state guidance, one of the biggest concerns is having students eating together, and whether they're eating together in the cafeteria or outside when, of course, it's nicer out, or eating together in their classrooms. That's probably the riskiest time for obvious reasons, right? Kids don't have masks on, you're eating, we've all been younger kids who are eating. We know how that can be fun, and we're talking across the tables, and we're aspirating, right? And so there's saliva gathering, all those gross things. I have a daughter, so trust me, I know how gross eating goes. But that is probably the biggest concern that we're trying to work through, right? And we know that 6 months from now, with the vaccine being in place for that long, that there may be way more guidance around opening schools full time from the state of New Jersey, are things that we should focus on. And so we're confident that, in partnership with our, health professionals and those who are helping us with making decisions around contact tracing and all those type of things, and also the governor's executive orders and all. I'm sure that between now and then we'll have a lot of guidance. That's what we're waiting on as superintendents. I meet with my colleagues all the time, and there are certain tipping points that will really help us to move towards what our goal is, to get our kids back, and not just back in a cohort, and not just back in A day, B day, but back to as much normalcy as we can be. And the last couple of pieces that guidance will help us on is, will we have virtual learning still as a mandate, right? Because having a virtual learning mandate really impacts our curriculum planning and our approach. And also, is social distancing still mandated, right? Because right now we're at a 6-foot recommendation, and we take all the state's recommendations to mean more than a recommendation, right? This is a directive. The state, we're not going to violate what the state is recommending for us. And so if you have a 6-foot social distancing, or even a 3-foot social distancing, you're still reducing the number of students who can be in the classroom, because the capacity has been shrunk due to that social distance mandate. You can imagine thinking about in the cafeteria how close kids are. They're elbow to elbow, right? There's lucky to get 6 inches of space, or on our buses, you're lucky to get a foot of social distance. So all those things are as important as our ventilation is. And the reason that I keep saying that we exceed the standard is because there are other issues that I've shared with parents who've written me, and of course they write me, and I respond almost immediately if I can, to let them know what those tipping points are, right? While we know ventilation is important, research has also showed that mitigation, masks, social distancing, those things are also very important. But the mandates around social distancing, virtual learning, et cetera, are really almost as important to returning, in returning, to plan to return to as normal of a circumstance as we all hope to be able to do.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor Frank, back to you.
I'd like to yield the floor to Trustee Clark for his questions. Trustee Clark.
Thank you, Mayor McGehee. I believe this question would be directed to either Mr. Roth or Dr. Taylor. You had mentioned that part of the overall plan was to hire, and forgive me, I'm not remembering the exact title, but basically a construction manager overseer role for the entirety of all these projects at all the different physical facilities within our school district. Number one, I'll say that sounds like a very wise idea. The question is, when will that individual be brought into the process? After bids have gone out, hopefully very soon? Where in the process would that individual be brought in?
Okay, the board about a year ago did appoint a construction management firm. We have Epic. During the development of the bid specifications, they were an integral part of that development because they're looking at things such as if steel or supplies show up in the middle of a school day, right? What language has to go in there to make sure the district isn't holding the bag for refusing a delivery of construction material when the school day is happening. It's those types of logistics. They also have a number of engineers on board, and they were double checking the work of the architects. So we had a lot of expert professionals' eyes on this. They are taking part in the pre-bid conference, and they will be working with the architect and reviewing the bid proposals and selecting the successful bidder, making sure everyone's, responsible, responsive, etc. Along with, of course, our legal counsel, because without paperwork, you can't do it, right? So that part's already in place. The additional person that we're recommending in the budget is to hire a facility director that would umbrella that and act on behalf of the business administrator, because at some point there's going to be just 3 contractors for the elementary schools, then you add in the secondary schools, all of those which require regular meetings and walkthroughs while the projects are going on, and a BA can't do all of that work on their own. They need additional help, so hence that facility director position. So once the budget is approved, which the preliminary budget is discussed and voted on Monday night, assuming everything goes well, then that would get posted as an anticipated opening. So July 1st, they could start and hit the road, which theoretically is just before any groundbreaking procedures happen.
And I could just add a little bit of context there. In my previous posts as superintendent, we went through a similar bit of construction, about $67 million. And I can say that the approach of having an outside entity as your construction manager, like your third, the person who works for you, not for the construction companies, is integral. It is something that you can't do without as a school district, and they really know their stuff, and they're always really hands-on with those contractors and the general contractors and all the mechanisms that we can't even think about as laypersons. I'll give you an example. In meeting with my former construction managers, we used to make sure that we were very intentional about when the construction workers were in the buildings, when they were in classrooms. They were working on a 3rd shift, which was during the night. And the last thing that you would ever want is a teacher to come to their classroom and find a big boot print in the middle of their desk, right? Or something that they've been working on for weeks, a diorama of some sort turned over. And when those things happen, it breaks the concentration of everyone. So they're a very important part of this. And that's just a small example of some of the work that they do. And we had our previous construction happening during the time of Superstorm Sandy. And so all the complications that came with that as well. So I agree and support this action that Mr. Roth just noted.
And just one last thing to add on to that, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the municipal building departments. Already a tremendous amount of help reviewing projects, making sure at least the paperwork ahead of time is as clean as possible to minimize change orders. And I've been in contact from time to time with building officials, and they are committed to looking out, on behalf of, in best interest of the school district and the township as a whole. So there's a huge community approach on this too. And I can't stress enough the value that the town officials are adding to this. So a big thank you there as well. So.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Thank you, Trustee Clark. I want to move on to the next part of our agenda, but before I do, I just want to take one more chance to provide or allow any of my colleagues any final closing questions or remarks. Board President Joshua, I was going to yield the floor to you anyway, so.
Great, so thank you. I just want to clarify or add a little bit of color on one thing that came up with construction, specifically with Clinton. And this is the idea of that we're building first and then taking the portables down. If I'm not mistaken, there's a law that basically says you cannot build. You have to build space. You have to replace the existing classroom space before knocking it down. And so therefore, and that affected all of our plans. And since that, the portables are in some cases probably where you would have wanted to build the additions, but you can't build the addition until you knock down. You cannot knock down a portable until you build it. So I just wanted to clear that. And then Dr. Taylor, I know you said it a couple of times. I just want to clarify for folks. You said kindergarten. I know you meant incoming kindergarten, not students currently in kindergarten in terms of being affected by the intentional integration algorithm. So I just want to double and triple check that so that that doesn't get misconstrued. So those are my two things. I think, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll move, I think we're now moving on to public speaks.
I'm yielding the floor to you, Board President. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Boz, I see you sent me the information. As of right now, I do not see any audio comment requests. So I will now move on to the written comments submitted by the public. The first one is from Aylin Abin of Maplewood. When will we have an actual prospective plan? I know a hard thing for this board, given lack of proactive thinking thus far for fall construction. How will you ask for votes when your time, if you have not met this challenge on getting our kids back in school? It has been a year since my current fourth grade has been inside a classroom. How long before you start caring? And our second public speaks, again, that was Aylin Abin of Maplewood. Our second public speaks comes from Catherine Bernard of South Orange. In the midst of the latest depressing and frustrating dysfunction, it feels like we're losing sight that even on April 19th as a potential date for the start of phase 4 is hardly a win. For 60% of our grades, that means merely a handful of mornings through the end of the year. Fewer than 20 half days of in-person instruction learning barely qualifies as in-person learning. There's also the drastic reduction of hours for instruction that hybrid approach means. An issue it feels like we've skirted around all year with too many other fires to put out. With such a low bar this year, what assurances can the administration and board offer anxious parents now about a full-time return to in-person learning in the fall? By full-time, I mean 5 days a week and 7 hours a day for all grades. Please don't hide behind waiting to see what the state requires on a virtual option. Just assume there will be a virtual requirement. What's the plan to accommodate all students, not just elementary, who want the option of full-time in-person learning in the fall? In previous presentations, you've mentioned busting up the differential between us and other districts who have been able to offer full days of schooling this year. The intentional integration plan is equally and depressingly lacking in any implementation specifics beyond the fact that it will mean more busing next year. What commitments are you able to offer our community that we won't be hamstrung to another year of less than full days of school as a result? What are your plans to use ESSER funds now to ensure a full-time return to school in the fall? You've got community groups and individuals providing all sorts of specific suggestions and innovative ideas. Testing protocols, portable HEPA filters, outdoor spaces, and plexiglass, just some ideas in circulation on spending. In comparison, we're getting nothing in terms of actual details from the administration. With clarity and conviction, can you share what the defined goalposts for a return to full-time in-person learning for all grades who want it next year, and the specifics of how you plan to get us there? Again, that was Catherine Bernard of South Orange. And that concludes our public comment.
Thank you, Board President Joshua. Hearing no further public comment, I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I get a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, is someone going to respond back to Ms. Bernard?
Fair question.
I thought so.
Board President Joshua, in terms of your process, do you respond back to these questions as they are directed theoretically to the board?
Usually Dr. Taylor responds. It's been our process. He got logged off. He's trying to log back in. I'll see if the school summit meeting, this might be a different process, but I will ask Dr. Taylor to just pop back up on the screen if he. Let's give him a minute to. Okay, there we go. Are you back, Dr. Taylor?
Did he hear the questions? That is probably.
Let me see.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I got zonked out into cyberspace somewhere. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know. Did you miss any? How much did you miss?
When I came back in, I could hear the end of public speaks.
Okay.
And so I can go back and respond to those if that would be the pleasure of the Board of School estimate. I know that in some bodies that there isn't a response, but I'm happy to respond if that's what is acceptable here.
We are open to that, just to be transparent and put closure to those comments. So I'll yield the floor to you, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to shift my screen so that I could see the public speaks, or has it already been read into the record?
It's been. I
Okay.
believe you have a copy of the written record of the written.
All right. So I believe that both of these public speaks are talking about the fall and also about the challenge that our community is experiencing. And it speaks about specificity around the phases and the likelihood of us reaching phase 4. And some of the plans around opening. Just reading through here to make sure that I respond to every piece here. So I believe, first of all, thank you to both of these citizens who took time out of their evening to send us their concerns. I believe that our discussion and your representatives' questions reflect the similar concern to what you have voiced here. I believe that most are aware that it's my goal professionally and personally and as a representative of the Board of Education to return our students to our schools if their families so choose as soon and as quickly as possible, and of course as safely and as soon as possible. As we stated, we've invested heavily in the return of our students. For those who may not be aware, our task force has over 100 professionals who participate in the planning of our reopening and still the ongoing challenges around reopening as the CDC gives us updates and the state and our local departments of health give us updates. We have not given up on returning our students to school, again, if their parents so choose, making sure that our families have that opportunity. We will be giving an update tomorrow regarding the current circumstances. And we have hopes that our schools will open further next week, as Somaya has indicated in the letter that they sent us in February. We are preparing for such, and we will update families with any information that we receive because we know this is of top of mind for our entire community. We've met with our principals today, again, updating them on our current concerns. They've done a magnificent job in assigning classrooms and preparing and being nimble during these current circumstances. And we will continue to be communicative, and we thank you for your support. And I can't be as precise in my responses as I would like to, because some of this is obviously outside of my control, but we are continuing to push what we know our community, our parents, and our students deserve. That concludes my responses.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. And thank you, Board President Joshua. I will now again entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
May I get a second, please?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the board estimate is now adjourned. Thank you for your time and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah.
Stay safe.